Have you ever poured your entire soul into something? I mean, truly, every late night, every skipped lunch, every ounce of your creative spirit, all for a single, magnificent dream? And then, have you ever had the person you trust most in the world rip that dream away from you, right in front of your eyes, and then try to sell it back to the world as their own? Most people would say that's a nightmare. I learned to call it an opportunity. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about architecture. Not the kind with steel and glass, but the kind you use to rebuild a life from the ground up, on a foundation of betrayal. Stick around, because the final design is something you won't want to miss. My name is Eleanor Vance, but everyone calls me Eliza. For 10 years, I was the co-founder and, let's be honest, the creative engine behind Croft and Vance Architects. The other half of that name belonged to Julian Croft. My partner. My fiancé. So, picture this. Our firm was our baby. It was built on my designs and his charisma. I was the architect, the one who could see the soul of a building in a derelict lot. I spoke the language of light and space and sustainable flow. Julian spoke the language of money. He was handsome, slick, a master of the boardroom handshake and the persuasive pitch. He could sell a blizzard to a snowman. And for a long time, I thought we were the perfect team. I'd sketch the vision, and he would give it a voice. But a poison had been seeping into the foundations for years. It started small. It was in the way he'd present my concepts in meetings. He'd say, I, instead of we. My vision for this atrium. The way I conceptualized the light flow. At first, I corrected him. Gently. We thought it would be best, Julian. He'd just laugh it off, a dazzling flash of white teeth. Of course, darling. Force of habit. Then came Chloe. A junior graphic designer, fresh out of art school. She had wide, ambitious eyes and she hung on Julian's every word. I watched her at the company holiday party, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes, her hand lingering on his arm just a second too long. Julian, at 42, was suddenly wearing designer sneakers to the office and using slang that made him sound like he was auditioning for a teen drama. It was a cliché so sharp it could cut glass. But the real turning point, the project that would define and then almost destroy me, was called the Viridian Project. It was my magnum opus. A sweeping, multi-billion-dollar urban renewal plan to transform a 20-block industrial wasteland into a self-sustaining, green community. It was radical, it was beautiful, and it was going to be our legacy. I spent 2 years of my life breathing that project. The complex energy grids, the reclaimed water systems, the public gardens woven between residential towers, it was all me. Julian's contribution was schmoozing city council members and finding potential investors. We were on the verge of securing the final city contract. The culmination of everything. I was working late one Thursday, refining the final schematics for the presentation. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the servers and the soft scratch of my pen. I felt a buzz of excitement. We were so close. That's when the email landed. It wasn't just to me. The subject line was, a new direction. It was sent to all senior staff, our primary investors, and the head of the City Planning Commission. My hands went cold as I read. To all, effective immediately, I am announcing my resignation from Croft and Vance to launch my new, forward-thinking firm, Croft Innovations. I believe the future of architecture requires a more agile and singular vision, one I can no longer pursue within my current partnership. I am thrilled to announce that my flagship project will be the Viridian Project, which I will be developing independently. I look forward to ushering in this new era of design with my new head of creative design, Chloe Sanders, and several other key team members who share my vision. We wish Eleanor Vance the best in her future endeavors. He didn't even have the decency to tell me to my face. He nuked our life's work, our relationship, our firm, with a press release. He hadn't just left me. He had professionally, publicly, and meticulously, erased me. He was taking my masterpiece, the project that held every fiber of my being, and claiming it as his own. And he was taking our staff, my staff, people I had mentored, with him. My phone started vibrating uncontrollably. Calls from panicked investors. Confused colleagues. The head of the city council. I didn't answer. I just sat there, in the silent office, staring at the blueprints for Viridian on my screen. My vision. My soul. And I felt a crack form right down the middle of my world. That was the core wound. Not just the betrayal of a lover, but the theft of a legacy. He thought he'd left me with nothing but the rubble of our shared life. He forgot one crucial thing. I'm the one who knows how to build. The next few weeks were a blur of managed chaos. Julian, the coward, had already cleared out his office. So had Chloe, and 5 of our best project managers. The investors for Viridian immediately pulled their preliminary funding from Croft and Vance, pledging it to the visionary Julian Croft. My firm was gutted overnight. The phone calls I did take were brutal. Clients putting projects on hold. Creditors wanting to know if we were still solvent. I remember standing in the middle of our cavernous, half-empty office, the ghost of Julian's expensive cologne still hanging in the air. I felt hollowed out. But I wasn't entirely alone. So, the pretty boy finally showed his true colors. That was Leo. Leo Petrov. Our head structural engineer. A man in his late 60s with a face like a roadmap of every project he'd ever built and a voice that sounded like gravel and whiskey. He'd been with me since I was an intern. He saw Julian for what he was from day one. He took everything, Leo, I whispered, my voice hoarse. He took Viridian. Leo snorted, a sound like a small engine turning over. Kid, he took a pile of drawings. He took a sales pitch. He can't take what's in here. He tapped my temple with a thick finger. The vision. That's yours. Let him have the flashy garbage. You and I, we build things that last. That was the spark I needed. A flicker of defiance in the dark. Long story short. I didn't crumble. I grieved, yes. I spent one full weekend in my pajamas, eating ice cream and watching terrible movies. But on Monday morning, I was back in the office. I called my lawyer, the same one who had helped me set up my own personal holding company years ago. Just in case, measure I took when Julian first started getting a little too cavalier with our business accounts. A lucky instinct. The first step was survival. I let go of our expensive downtown office space. It was painful, like amputating a limb, but necessary. Leo and I, along with the 3 loyal employees who stayed, moved into a small, dusty workshop space in the old industrial district. We rebranded. Croft and Vance was dead. Vance Design was born. Julian, meanwhile, was living his best life. Chloe's Instagram was a nauseating chronicle of their new, power couple, life. Champagne toasts at 5-star restaurants. Lavish parties with investors. Self-congratulatory posts captioned with things like, so proud to watch this visionary build his empire. He was everywhere, featured in design magazines as the new messiah of urban planning. And in every article, he talked about his Viridian project. I blocked them both. I didn't need to see it. I needed to work. While Julian was busy on his victory tour, I was in my dusty workshop, doing the one thing he could never do. I was making the Viridian project better. I stayed up nights, not crying, but creating. I found new, more efficient sustainable materials. I redesigned the energy grid to be 30% more effective. I reworked the community spaces to feel more organic, more human. I called this new version Viridian Legacy. It was a secret between me, Leo, and my computer. And then, I found my secret weapon. It was something deeply personal. My grandfather had been a railway man. When he passed, he left me something most people would consider worthless, the deed to a derelict, 10-acre abandoned rail yard that bordered the Viridian development zone. It was a polluted, ugly stretch of land. Julian had always called it my sentimental scrap heap and urged me to sell it for pennies. But as I studied the city infrastructure maps for Viridian Legacy, I saw it. The rail yard wasn't just next to the development site. It was the key. It sat directly on top of the only viable route for utility access, freight delivery for construction, and the planned light rail extension. Without access through my scrap heap, construction costs for the project would triple. The logistics would be a nightmare. Julian, in his haste to steal my work, had focused on the shiny towers and the grand vision. He had completely overlooked the grimy, practical foundation it all had to be built on. I didn't call him. I didn't send a cease and desist. I just kept the deed in a very safe place. Instead, I took my new, vastly superior, Viridian Legacy plans and booked a meeting. Not with a bank, but with a person. Isabella Rossi. A legendary, semi-retired venture capitalist known for two things, being notoriously shrewd, and investing in women-led businesses with real substance. She was terrifying, brilliant, and she didn't suffer fools. Julian had tried to get a meeting with her for years and failed. I walked into her stark, minimalist office with nothing but my laptop and a scale model Leo had helped me build. I didn't give her a sales pitch. I just told her the story. The real story. And then, I showed her my work. I showed her Julian's stolen plan, and then I showed her Viridian Legacy. She listened without interruption, her eyes missing nothing. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair. So, she said, her voice sharp and clear. The boy wonder is selling a pale imitation of your work, and he doesn't even realize he's building on land he can't access. That's the short version, yes, I said. A slow smile spread across her face. I despise plagiarists. And I adore a well-designed trap. Let's talk numbers, Ms. Vance. The next 6 months were a masterclass in covert operations. While Julian was breaking ground on a fancy new headquarters for Croft Innovations, and giving TED Talks about his creative process, I was quietly building an arsenal. With a seed investment from Rossi Capital, Vance Design took on a smaller, but highly prestigious project, the redesign of the city's Museum of Modern Art wing. It was a complex, delicate job that required real skill, not just slick marketing. We poured our hearts into it. Leo engineered a breathtaking floating staircase that seemed to defy gravity, and I designed an interior that played with natural light in ways no one had seen before. When it opened, it was a critical sensation. We didn't get flashy magazine covers like Julian, but we got something better, respect. The quiet, powerful kind. The name Vance Design started to be whispered in the right circles. People were starting to ask, who is this Eleanor Vance? And where has she been? The first real confrontation happened at an industry awards dinner. I went with Leo. And of course, Julian was there, holding court at the center table, Chloe draped on his arm. He saw me across the room and his smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. He made his way over, oozing fake charm. Eliza. Darling, he began, loud enough for everyone to hear. No hard feelings, I hope. It's just business. Your little museum project is cute. Very tasteful. Cute. He was trying to patronize me, to put me back in the box of the quiet creative he'd left behind. I just smiled. A calm, serene smile that I knew would drive him insane. It's good to see you too, Julian. I'm glad to see Viridian is keeping you so busy. It's a very ambitious project. I truly hope you've considered all the logistical angles. They can be tricky. I watched the flicker of confusion in his eyes. He had no idea what I was talking about, but the seed of doubt was planted. He expected tears, or anger. He didn't expect pity. I walked away, leaving him standing there with his mouth slightly open. Behind the scenes, the alliance with Isabella Rossi was solidifying into a fortress. She didn't just give me money, she gave me access to her team of cutthroat lawyers and financial analysts. We drafted the contracts. We secured the environmental clearances for the rail yard, something Julian's team hadn't even started on. We were building a shadow project, a mirror image of his, but one that was real, fully funded, and legally airtight. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a month before Julian's big day. The city, dazzled by his marketing blitz, had announced a massive public unveiling gala for the Viridian project. The mayor would be there. All the investors. The press. It was to be Julian Croft's coronation as the king of modern architecture. Isabella called me into her office. On her desk was a gold-embossed invitation to the gala. "He's throwing himself a party," she said, a glint in her eye. "It would be a shame not to bring a gift." "What did you have in mind?" I asked. "His plans are being submitted to the city planning board for final approval 72 hours before the gala," she said, tapping a polished fingernail on the invitation. "My sources tell me his investors are contractually obligated to release the final tranche of funding, $900 million, once that approval is granted. He'll walk onto that stage thinking he's a billionaire." She leaned forward. "I've arranged a special presentation slot for you. Right after his. The mayor has been informed that there is a competing, fully funded proposal of significant civic interest that he needs to be aware of before any final signatures." The trap was set. The bait was his own towering ego. He was about to walk onto the biggest stage of his life to celebrate a victory he hadn't earned, with a project he didn't understand, built on a foundation he didn't own. And I would be there, waiting in the wings, with the masterpiece he never knew existed. The night of the gala was electric. The venue was a cathedral of wealth and power, dripping with chandeliers and overflowing with champagne. I saw them all there, the city council members Julian had charmed, the investors he'd duped, the journalists he'd fed his life story to. And in the center of it all was Julian, glowing with triumph. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my first car, with Chloe on his arm looking like a terrified, sparkling doll. I stayed in the shadows, near the back, with Leo and Isabella. Leo, uncharacteristically, was wearing a suit. He looked as uncomfortable as a bear in a dollhouse. "You ready, kid?" he rumbled, squeezing my shoulder. "I'm ready," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. It wasn't nerves. It was anticipation. Then, the lights dimmed. The mayor gave a gushing introduction, calling Julian a true visionary, a titan of industry. Julian walked on stage to thunderous applause. A massive screen behind him lit up with the Croft Innovations logo. His presentation was exactly what I expected, slick, polished, and soulless. He walked them through the renderings Chloe had made, my renderings, but with all the heart stripped out. He talked about profit margins and luxury penthouses. He didn't mention reclaimed water or community gardens once. He was selling a product, not a home. He was desecrating my dream, and the audience was eating it up. He finished with a flourish, arms outstretched. "Welcome," he boomed, "to the future. Welcome to my Viridian project." The room erupted. Standing ovation. Investors were beaming, slapping him on the back. Julian took a bow, his face a mask of unbearable smugness. This was his moment. And then, the mayor stepped back to the microphone. "Thank you, Julian, for that impressive presentation," he said, with a slight, new hesitation in his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a surprise this evening. It has come to the city's attention that there is another proposal for this site. A significant one. Please welcome the founder of Vance Design, Ms. Eleanor Vance." I walked out of the darkness and into the spotlight. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me. I found Julian's face in the crowd. The smugness was gone, replaced by pure, slack-jawed shock. I took my place at the podium. I didn't look at him. I looked at the investors, at the mayor, at the press. "Good evening," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Mr. Croft has shown you a building. I'm here to show you a community." The screen behind me switched from his logo to mine, Vance Design. And then, the first rendering of Viridian Legacy appeared. It was breathtaking. It was my original vision, but evolved, perfected. The crowd audibly gasped. I walked them through it. I showed them the solar glass windows, the rooftop apiaries, the gray water recycling that would save the city millions. I showed them the human element he had erased. A vision is more than just a pretty picture, I said, my eyes finally locking with Julian's. It requires an understanding of the foundation. For instance, a project of this scale requires massive logistical support. The screen behind me changed to a satellite map. The Viridian site was outlined in red. And next to it, my 10-acre rail yard, was outlined in bright, impossible to miss green. Mr. Croft's proposal seems to have overlooked one crucial detail, I continued, my voice turning to ice. All major road, utility, and rail access for this site runs directly through a single, privately owned parcel of land. An arrow appeared, pointing to the green block. A parcel that is not for sale. A wave of frantic whispering swept the room. I saw Julian's primary investor, a man named Henderson, go pale. But a logistical challenge is solvable, with enough money, I said, turning the knife. A funding challenge, however, that's more difficult. I looked directly at Isabella Rossi, who gave me a subtle nod. I'm thrilled to announce that Vance Design has secured full, private funding for Viridian Legacy, in partnership with Rossi Capital. Our project is ready to break ground tomorrow, with all necessary permits and land use rights already secured. Checkmate. It was absolute chaos. Henderson was on his phone, screaming at his lawyers. The mayor was staring at Julian with dawning horror, realizing he'd almost tied the city to a fraudulent, unbuildable project. Chloe was staring at Julian, not with adoration, but with the terrified realization that she'd hitched her wagon to a falling star. And Julian, he just stood there, his face ashen, his empire crumbling around him in the space of 5 minutes. He had the blueprints, but I had the land. He had the investors, but I had the better plan and the smarter money. He had the stage, but I had the truth. He looked at me, a look of pure, venomous hatred in his eyes. He mouthed a single word, how? I just gave him that same, serene smile from the awards dinner. I didn't stick around for the fallout. I let the lawyers handle that. Julian was hit with lawsuits from his investors for misrepresentation and fraud. Croft Innovations imploded before its first building was ever built. Chloe, I heard, left him that night and went back to her parents' house. He had to sell his fancy new headquarters at a loss just to cover his legal fees. Last I heard, he was trying to get a mid-level consulting job at a firm in another state. Erased. As for me, I'm standing on a hill, overlooking the site of Viridian Legacy. The ground has been broken. The foundations are being poured. Leo is beside me, sipping coffee from a thermos, looking happier than I've ever seen him. My firm, Vance Design, is thriving. We're known for integrity, for vision, and for building things that last. I found peace, not in the destruction of Julian, but in the creation of something beautiful from the rubble he left behind. He thought my story was an epilogue to his. A sad little footnote. He never realized, his entire spectacular downfall was just the preface to mine. He sent an email to end my career, but all he did was hit send on my destiny. And that's how I took back my dream. It just goes to show you, never, ever underestimate the person who actually knows how to draw the plans. If you enjoyed this story of justice and seeing a narcissist get exactly what they deserve, do me a favor. Hit that like button, drop a comment below with your favorite moment of karma, and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss the next story. Thanks for listening.